Is Singapore really the most expensive city in the world? Even though the ranking of the world's most expensive city has been changed slightly over the years, Singapore has always been on the top of the list. In this video, I'm going to talk about whether this is true or not. First argument is, if you walk along Orchard, there is Chanel and luxury brands, and every mall you go into, there is Rolex and all these luxury watch brands, and you have an omakase for $600 and everything looks fancy, but honestly, you can live without that Chanel bag, right? So I think luxury goods and a lot of luxury branded stores is not really a factor we should take into account when talking about the most expensive city, because you can find these stores all over the world. So, whereas you can live without your latest Gucci bag and a Rolex watch, you can't live without your daily essentials, which are the costs of living. For cost of living, you basically have no choice. You need to eat, you need to sleep somewhere, you need to make daily groceries. So let's talk about the essentials here. First up is housing. Singapore has so-called HDBs. This is the Housing Development Board. This is housing that is subsidized by the government of Singapore and allows Singaporeans to live in affordable apartments all over the city, and you don't have to pay a lot of rent. Of course, there are always certain restrictions and you need to fill certain criteria to get such an HDB. But I know a lot of friends who applied for an HDB 2 years ago. They had to wait for a certain amount of time, but they now live in a very affordable and nice apartment. Next up is healthcare. Healthcare costs can go up through the roof in a lot of countries in the world and also make people go into debt after having an accident or being sick and ill for a longer time. But in Singapore, Singaporeans benefit from a subsidized healthcare system, which makes the daily or even small visits to the doctor affordable. And even if you have a big accident and need to stay in hospital for a longer time, you have the option for a subsidized healthcare. This is, I think, a very, very big advantage in Singapore. Then there is public transport. Public transport in Singapore, I love the MRT. I take the MRT every day, and also the buses are very efficient and so affordable. Basically, you really don't need a car because the system is efficient, the costs are very low. Cars are very expensive in Singapore, but the good public transport system doesn't even make it necessary to have a car here. Next is you have to eat. And this is also one of my favorite parts because food, you can spend so much money on food. And often people say, well, good food is expensive, but this is not true for Singapore. I found the best food at hawker centers, and you can get a meal for under $5 at food courts, hawker centers, and even small eateries. So yes, you have an omakase for $600 and you have Michelin-starred restaurants and chefs who serve you Wagyu beef and very expensive meals. But on a daily basis, if you have to cut costs, you can eat super well and super good for a very low price. You have wet markets where you can get fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, even fish and meats at very affordable prices. If you go to more expensive supermarkets like FairPrice or cold storage, yes, it is more expensive, but you have so many other options. And this makes Singapore such a foodie paradise. You have these ice cream sandwiches for $1.50 on Orchard Road. $1.50 for an ice cream sandwich. I mean, who can say no to that? Then we can talk about utility bills. In comparison to countries where it's very cold and you need heating and better isolation, Singapore, you don't need any heating. So this can save you a lot of money for electricity bills, which might not be true for aircon, but there are fans and you can cut costs on not having an aircon and just living with fans, which for me would be totally fine. Also, there is a price control on necessities. So Singapore government, they always supervise certain food costs or prices to make sure that it is affordable to the population of Singapore. The next thing is low income tax. Compared to other Western countries, Singapore has a relatively low income tax, which makes it very interesting for business people and also companies to have a lot of workers here, and it is attractive to work here. And then it's also good to mention that the government provides certain systems and they have programs to subsidize families with low income They give away vouchers and have programs that even people and families with low income can make their living affordable. And now I quickly want to compare Singapore to some of the other countries which are considered to be the most expensive cities in the world. Also, I'm going to talk about Zurich, which I come from, because I think it's for me very, very interesting to see comparison between Switzerland and Singapore, because people would always tell me, well, Singapore must be so expensive. Now, being in Singapore for quite a while, I can definitely say that Singapore is less expensive than Switzerland. And the biggest factor taken into account are the costs for food and eating. So in Switzerland, you don't have anything like hawker centers or low option food places. If you go to a restaurant, you buy a plate of pasta, just pasta with tomato sauce, it costs you easily $30. And that's not even a fancy place. And what happened over the last year with inflation is also that groceries have become very expensive. Big families also struggle with cooking at home because groceries have gotten very expensive. And there are no wet markets where you can buy groceries for a very low price. So yes, food is definitely a reason why Singapore is less expensive than Switzerland. And also heating bills can go up quite high in countries like also New York in winter, or Tokyo in winter, and Switzerland in winter. It gets very cold in Switzerland. So yes, I think utility bills is compared to other countries, it's still affordable in Singapore. And then we have housing. So as mentioned before, Singapore government subsidizes HDBs, which makes living in Singapore affordable. You don't have any programs like this in Zurich or Paris, Tokyo, New York. And coming back from Hong Kong, and we checked out some of the apartment prices, we realized that housing in Hong Kong is very, very expensive, and you don't have any affordable programs, which makes living in Hong Kong less expensive. So we can be very happy in Singapore. Also, healthcare is not the same in all of these countries mentioned, because most of these cities, they don't have any subsidized healthcare systems. If you fall ill, it can really happen to you that you can't pay your bills anymore and you go down a very bad spiral. So to summarize, in my opinion, as a 27-year-old woman living in Singapore, not living the fanciest lifestyle, but still I can treat myself to some nice restaurants once in a while. I can go around the city with public transport. I can eat good food. It is very affordable to live in Singapore if you don't go to an omakase restaurant or you shop at Louis Vuitton every day. I can definitely say Singapore is not the most expensive city in the world. I hope this was useful. And also follow me on Instagram if you want to look how the life in Singapore looks on a daily basis. How and where you can get this cheap $5 chicken rice. Leave a comment if you have any questions, and if you subscribed and liked this video, this really helps my channel. Hope to see you in the next one.